Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thank you very much for this invitation. Looking at the topic, trade and economic and trade impacts of data transfers, I first want to draw your attention to a major project which the institute I come from, ICTSD, has completed. It's called the E15 project. The report was launched at Davos. There are 18 different topics, and data, services, innovation, etc. A number of them actually cover the concerns which you are here to address today. In the background of what is involved with data transfer and why the concern, etc., I take a step back and I look at the historical experience of trade, how trade has grown far more rapidly for several years than GDP. That's not necessarily the case at present, but historically that's been the experience. It has been the engine that pulled global economies, and two important reasons for that, which are identified, are changes in logistics, so packing, transport, etc., and technological advances. Data transfers actually embody both of them, and they connect in a far larger way than was ever conceived to be possible earlier. So when we look at what we are really trying to see is both data transfers and the technology which enables those data transfers. So that is the framework we have to look at. And when we look at this framework, we see this is precisely the force which propelled trade, investment, etc. historically in the last 20-30 years. So the immediate impact is the volume impact which takes place. Second, this has occurred through creation of platforms. They are general purpose kind of technologies. So you can use those platforms for multiple services. So new services can come. Services functioning on top of those new services, the so-called OTT, etc., which can create very disruptive market conditions. So the change which will happen due to data transfers will happen far more frequently and far more rapidly. So society has to adjust to that. And second, while we are looking at data transfers, there's a McKinsey report which says 75% of the impact on productivity, etc., of this happens in sectors which are outside the technology realm. Be it manufacturing, be it any other services kind of related activity. So the scope is not only going to be rapid, large, but will encompass entire economic activities, not just that, social activities. So it is really another, that's why the fourth industrial revolution is actually far more powerful than the first three, which have been discussed earlier. And that then goes into every aspect of society, be it security. There is tension of objectives. In one place we are saying we must protect the transfer of data so that data is kept within certain kind of limits of surveillance. But those precisely same limits in certain other conditions create problems for the same people if it's done, for example, by countries which are intruding into those limits and then trying to create conditions which another value system finds not very likable. So how do we manage this? Because here is a technology which is connecting widely. Borders, distances vanish. But the way of doing things are not the same. So there is an obvious need for some kind of regulatory oversight globally. But how do you manage that? And that oversight, or those conditions, determine competitiveness, as it has already been talked about. You have different regulations, you have different competitive conditions. In fact, these conditions or underlying regulatory frameworks embody value systems. They embody the the manner in which you are sensitive to bringing about change in a world where there are concerns about environment, labor issues, various social aspects, etc. One of the reasons, in my view, about TPP coming up with the framework it has done is precisely to address them and create a level playing field. The data transfers, technologies, and different regulatory issues will create far more significant level playing field concerns. So that becomes very important. Another aspect which we have to see is, and the topic says economic and trade impacts. I started by looking at trade. That trade has grown more recently in the last 20 years, especially with an increasing overlap between investment, trade, goods, services, value chains, and technologies. And when you take this into account, the connections, we talked about insourcing. Insourcing is happening both because of technological change as well as because of concerns of making sure you're on the right side of the law. But it affects the competitive conditions. And global market is not limited only to the place where insourcing is taking place. And historically we have seen an evolution of the global importance of different economies. You take a look at the last 20 years and how the significance of different economies has changed and how that has caused concern or aspirations for policymakers. And you are creating through that a level playing field issue, which then when you marry it with value systems, how do you manage that? The mega regionals, I think, is the route which you can take place, and if you can actually connect it at a larger level, that's even better. The other thing is, because distances vanish, borders vanish, jurisdictions overlap, but in practice, there are strict borders, there are strict jurisdictional issues. How do you combat that? The only way out is cooperation. That's the only way out in a system where, in effect, jurisdictions are exercised, but in practice, through data transfers and technologies, they vanish. But how do you manage that? New systems have to be developed for that. So then, when distances change, job profiles change, new jobs come in. And you can actually work from home. You can choose your timings. This has implications for labor laws. This has implications for concerns about employment, about skills. And it has implications for the manner in which nations interact with each other. The future of jobs is a very serious issue, and it's all linked to data transfers and technologies. The economic and social and trade impacts is embedded in that. The other thing which we have to take into account is that it's very much more easier for the young to take on these new developments, understand them and use them. The two places where the maximum increase in population is taking place is Africa and South Asia, or Asia, if I may put it that way, combined with an increase in the middle class. So you combine these two projections and you see the engine of change, which is predicting the changes in economic and capability profiles over time. The only way the existing superior economies or larger, more sophisticated economies can maintain the importance is through technological advance, innovation, and the combination of intellectual property rights. So, how does one manage this? It's a change which is going to happen. How do you manage that change? Superimpose the demographic profile change. Because inherent in this are tensions, which if you don't manage, these trade tensions will spill over into larger areas which are more difficult to manage. So the common cooperative regulatory mechanisms have to be developed. And any framework we formulate over time must keep this sensitivity alive there. Rather than imposition, it has to be more carrying everyone together to the best extent possible. Then the world of advertising is now segmenting. Actually, this is a very interesting phenomena, because if one studies economics 101 and looks at the demand curve, firms don't necessarily address each and every part of that curve, every consumer's needs. Now you are more in a position to do so. It makes the market far more complex, but it allows consumer satisfaction to a larger level. And if this can be done from a distance, then there are pressures which require a completely new way of business practices or business policies, and they are evolving. The data transfer and technology combinations has led to very different business plans and business policies and locational policies. And since there is death of distance, you can try and regulate what you want, but convergence and inability to stop communication will not address the concerns which you so much need to address in order to maintain the happiness of your local population. How do you manage that? I'll just come very quickly to the end. So new capabilities emerge, and faster productivity takes place as the critical mass increases, because there is a saturation point also. Saturation point can be shifted through technological change. When you look at this, the effects of loss of jobs, because this technology is also very disruptive, and jobs shift across geographical places. The difficulty of SMEs initially, and then the empowerment of SMEs. New forms of commerce and financial intermediation. The common rules of trade on rules of origin, they just become more difficult to manage. And this will change the significance of present economic centers and activities. And this impact is going to come very quickly. So it's a combination of multiple developments with the possibility of others to emulate them easily, which is why it is also a high priority and a high risk factor. Privacy, of course, is there. And I believe a lot of thought has gone into how you can manage restrictions together with openness. That's what systems like WTO, etc. have managed, and the new systems which are coming in. So they need to be explored far more with monitoring and cooperation. Otherwise, the impact will be way beyond any single country's ability to monitor and govern. Thank you.